very different from what was going on in Chicago, which was representational painting, and also abstraction. This is a little bit more involved with people, maybe younger people, I thought. Well, I should say that before I went to the Art Institute, I did a lot of things. I didn't go right out of high school. I tried engineering, I tried physics, I tried biology for a while. I went from Purdue University to Illinois University and couldn't find my way. I went into the Army, and then when I came out, I decided I'm going to try to get into art. So I'm not quite sure what made me think that way, but it was partially what was going on in Chicago. So I registered for the Art Institute, and I got in, put in my work, and got in little works that I was doing when I was in the Army. And I became their painter. And I went to a lot of their talks and saw what they were doing just about every week. So these are some of that group. We can go on here. These are images of some of these guys now who were in their 20s when I saw them and when I saw what they were doing. They seemed wacky, crazy, but I was into it. I guess I saw what was very, very, very unique and very different about what they were doing. So this is very flat work. It's all flat, all on paint, on canvas or on paper. And I was involved. They did do some art objects also, like purses and so on and so forth. But this is basically the group. We can move on from there. Okay, some of their work. It was a representational, but in its cartoon atmosphere. Okay, so I went to Syracuse University, where I had Harold as my student in a figure drawing class. But I was painting at Syracuse, so I worked on paper. These are a couple of works on paper that I'll show you here that I was doing, partially based in abstraction and partially coming from the Harry Hu side. So it wasn't representational, but it was the same coloring and the same shaping that informed it. So these are works on paper and on canvas that I did at Syracuse and slightly after when I went to Philadelphia. Now, while in Chicago, track back a bit, while in Chicago, I was very interested in a movie called The Picture of Dorian Gray. Does anybody know of that novel or the movie? Okay, The Picture of Dorian Gray was about a fellow, a very, very good-looking fellow, British, Oscar Wilde story, who sold his soul to the devil. And how that took place is that his pact with the devil was that a portrait of him, of Dorian Gray, would stay, he would stay young. Dorian Gray would stay young forever, the person Dorian Gray, while the painting grew old. The character in the painting grew older and older and older and more, quite honestly, disgusting looking. The artist who did the painting is, I forgot his name again. I'll remember it. The artist who did the painting was a Chicago artist. This was a movie. This was for a movie called The Picture of Dorian Gray. He did the painting for the movie, the painting that grew uglier and uglier in each day. It grew uglier and uglier. That was the pattern. He would stay young forever, and the painting would grow old and ugly. So here in the movie, the painting, of course, grows older and older and older. So that's the painting. They're both initial paintings. This is Dorian Gray on the left, and this is Ivan Albright. I'm sorry, Ivan Albright was the name of the artist who did this painting. Now, Ivan Albright was a Chicago artist. So I was interested in seeing if I could get into his studio and see what he did. So I called him up. And he said, sure, come on over. So I went over to Ivan Albright's studio and I saw this painting. This was in the early 70s. I saw this painting from Dorian Gray, from the movie picture of Dorian Gray, which is the ugly painting. This is the picture of the wonderfully looking British nobleman, Dorian Gray. So it was as if painting could be anything. Painting could be something in your mind, it could be something for a movie, it could be whatever you wanted it to be. It's what I began to think as a student at the Art Institute. Meanwhile, I was taking classical drawing and classical painting. So I studied with some of the terrific classical painters in Chicago. We can move on here. I moved from Chicago to Syracuse University, where I got my master's degree, where I met Harold. And I did some animation. Now, this isn't digital animation. This is old animation with an animation stand and a large camera which went up and down in an animation room where cell work, like the old Walt Disney movies, cell work was placed on a bed and the camera came down and shot it, and you would click it, depending on what you wanted. So these are samples of some of the collage animation that I did at Syracuse. They were collages, just taking images and putting one over another and seeing what happened. So this was connected to the kind of thinking I was doing in drawing and painting. Combining things and making things move. I was very interested in the implication of motion and movement in my paintings. And here's an animation camera that allowed you to make moving images. So I went into it. I really went into it. Now, the cameraman who taught me how to use this animation camera was a cameraman in Chicago who moved to Syracuse, who worked at a studio that I was an apprentice in. Because I started thinking about animation early on, how it's done. And so this was very important that he was at Syracuse operating the camera because he knew that I was very, very serious about this. So these are all these things that happened during this this is, I think, about 10 minutes, For 10 minutes, I tried everything that I could as an animator. So these are still images. All these are still images that are run together on an animation camera, on a film. So I wasn't moving like this. I was moving like this and like this and like this and like that. So it came out like this. So let's finish this. I did another film. This I just played with, had a good time. This is another film that I did a little bit more serious, called Country Doctor. Has anybody heard of that novel? Short novel, A Country Doctor by Franz Kafka. Well, this is a I love that story. It's a very dark story, and I'll show you a little bit of it. I hired an actor to do the face and the talking, but the animation is something I did. If we back up a little bit, show a little bit of that, just when the animation comes in.
Without any payment whatsoever. But here I am in the snow and on a horse. It's hopeless. The servant girl.
Story about a doctor who couldn't perform his duties, couldn't do what people asked him to do. And despite everything, he tried and went into these villages and tried to help people, but nobody trusted him. So he was a failure as a country doctor. And Kafka's story talks about his failure as a doctor. So it's just very curious that that's good. Very curious that I kind of read the novel, I read the short novel, and made the animation at the same time. So these are not drawings or paintings, but they are interested. I'm very interested in motion. This is a motion with a story. So then I won a fellowship and I got to go to Europe. I spent 6 months in Italy, Spain, and France. Painting. I only had a small studio, and that's all I could do was paint. I couldn't make films. I couldn't do anything else. Now, what happened is but somehow the moving company, which was supposed to take all our luggage back to the States, lost all my work. So 6 months worth of work was down the drain. I couldn't find it. They couldn't find it. They don't know what happened to it. Okay, is this better? Yeah. Okay, sorry. Getting excited. So that's next in line. So I lost all the art that I made in Europe, all the paintings and drawings. But I did save something, a memory of the great stained glass pieces, windows that I saw in Barcelona, and Paris, and in Germany. So I studied the stained glass very closely and found out how it was made and so on. But I certainly was not going to take the time to do stained glass in the States. But I came back and I taught at the Philadelphia College of Art for some years, and I was doing a lot of drawing, a lot of painting, because everything came from the drawing and the painting. Everything else came, the movies, the sound, the movement of other things came from these. This is what I still do every day. So these are paintings from some years ago. And what happened is that I started to think that I wanted these paintings to come out of the frame somehow. I wanted them to come out and just to live in the space. So this next series of works show the extension of the painting outside of
I make art.
the wall.
I make art mostly in public places. I make art that the public is invited to walk through, to become a part of, or at least to reach and to touch it. I don't make the kind of art ordinarily that is on the wall exclusively or completely three-dimensional. I try to fuse the two-dimensional aspects of art making and the three-dimensional activity. I make art that is hopefully in progress all the time, that is always in the process of becoming, not quite there, that involves the public in direct participation.
The piece at the Greater Western Center.
I started doing installations because I wanted to see my paintings come out of the wall. I saw the work, my work in the late 60s as wanting to come out of the frame. And so they started out by doing that. I started suspending shapes. First I built up the surfaces, and then I started suspending shapes in front of the surfaces, implying that these were literally coming out of the painting. I thought of it that way. And I found that I was working back and forth. I would paint something and then mimic the shape as it was coming out, and then paint something else which mimicked that shape that was suspended in front, so that there was a rich activity, dialogue between the shape that was suspended and the shape that was painted. Eventually they grew. I saw that I really did need a canvas or a piece of paper, or a piece of paper, and I just needed a wall. And so the paintings literally were on the wall, and then they went off the wall. They came into the viewer's space. The reason that I like to work with installations, temporary work, is because I feel that I can do things in a temporary work that I couldn't do in a more permanent work. A painting, piece of sculpture has its parameters. Take it around, you can handle it, and put it here or there, put it in another space. And it stays away from paths that people take, not in the way. Well, these works are meant to be in the way. They are meant to take over the space that ordinarily is meant for. There's a general easy path. And suddenly you're in the middle of these shapes that are all over the place. Certainly isn't functional. But it's that very thing that makes me want to explore a certain space, and this space in particular. I'm creating this work at the Greater Western Arts Center over a period of about 2 weeks. The way I started this installation at the Grayscale is by using a stencil and spray enamel and spraying shapes directly on the wall. On top of those sprayed shapes, I would tack very temporary shapes made out of paper or gel material, transparent gel material, with the idea that the wall was supposed to be coming out. We were implying that the walls were coming out into the viewer's space.
not going to go through the whole thing. Why don't we see it on the thing? Just see it.
It's important to note that these works are the quality of the shapes and the textures as possible. That, I feel, generates ideas in drawing and painting, which follow closely on the heels of these installations. And then, those drawings and paintings tend to lead to other installations. So it's not from installation to installation, it's from installation to painting, drawing, and then back to installation.
All right, now these installations, which were temporary, led to the more permanent works that are deemed public art. Oh, yeah, that might be a good idea. That are typically termed public art. I don't know if you, obviously, the monument, Washington Monument is public art. And so on. So, how many people here have seen the renovation of the East Wing of the National Gallery? 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, you all got to see that. I mean, the National Gallery is a space which could educate you. So if you're going to study visual arts in any way, talking about digital or whatever, go to the East Wing of the National Gallery, which is just renovated. You'll see a wonderful series of works from the last 30 or 40 years in this country, pretty much New York, Washington, Chicago, and I think it would be a crime to miss that stuff. These works that you're seeing here, one is a model, and the other one is a 10-foot tall pyramid made out of polycarbonate with lighting inside and suspended shapes inside. The lighting will change periodically, so you get a colorful mixture. I think we might have a video of that. I don't know. I'm not sure what's next. No, that's all right. Go ahead. This is a work. For all my works in public spaces, I always do a model. So the model here was a digital model, which actually I got some help on because I was not like some of you guys. I wasn't that sophisticated, but I got some help. But this is for a public project in Baltimore. So I did this model, digital model. And guess what? I did not get the commission. So, which happened? It's going to happen in public, working with public art. But I wanted to show you the model because it was my only digital model. I worked with a computer savvy guy. So we can move on there. Okay. So, after a space where there weren't any public projects to attempt or to try for, I went back to the studio and did some drawing and painting. Okay. So these are large works on paper, watercolors. Abstract, I don't think of them as abstract. When I do them, I think of myself as kind of moving in and out of these spaces. So I find myself engaged in the work. itself. So I live in the work. Okay, go ahead. Now, this is a model for a commission that right here in on the metro station, that started to be built, and then they ran out of funds. Fairfax County ran out of funds, so we had to scrap it. They decided that we'll do something else. So this was the model for a Fairfax County transit station, that dealt with both lighting and form. This was supposed to be a piece that was about 30 feet across. So it was supposed to be a big piece. And these are different aspects of the model. You can shift on a little bit. Now, from the public commission that I'll talk about here is something that has a video, all the video, so I'll keep quiet for a while to watch the video.
The Reeves Center sits at the junction of U and 14th Streets in D.C.'s historic Shaw District. There, in the 40s and 50s, the U Street club scene drew world-class musicians and lay at the heart of a thriving political community.
The first time I went in it, I sensed a certain presence of the old jazz greats, I guess, who I used to listen to as a kid all the time. I mean, when I talked with some of the old-timers there, the people who had been there since the 40s, they told me of the folks that had been in there and that had been playing in that area, the Ellingtons, and certainly Lady Day and Ella and Miles and Coltrane. They all had been there. They all had played there, and sometimes in the very spot that the Reeves Center is built. So I kind of heard these sounds when I looked it over. And I decided to pretty much base my piece on these sounds. And so the name of the piece is U Street Sounds. And it's an attempt to recover those sounds that still kind of move through the air.
From 5 semifinalists, the selection committee chose the proposal by Walter Kravitz, a Virginia-based public artist and full-time professor at George Mason University in Fairfax. He planned to lighten the 2.5-story foyer by suspending 4 quartets of musicians above people's heads. Walter also wanted to continue the jazz theme into the 6.5-story atrium by suspending a course line of dancers from the skylit roof. U Street Sounds began to take shape in spring 1997 as Kravitz and his students built the individual components for the musicians and dancers. The 22 to 24-foot dancers were constructed from many different pieces. The smaller musicians, between 8 and 9 feet tall, hung as single elements. But for both, the fabrication was the same. First, the polycarbonate base was paper masked, then a pattern was cut and painted into the material. Once the figure is cut out, Walter adds the flowing detail that forms the stencil, through which he paints the figure. Project assistant Patrick Burke then scores the stencil lines onto each side of the piece. At the other end of the studio, 3 more students painstakingly lift the brown paper from the areas to be painted. The brown paper stencils allow Walter to plan and paint different designs on each side of the transparent pieces. Throughout the construction phase, Kravitz engaged his students in discussions about similarities and differences between public and private art.
I have to get the students that work with me, and work with my students, to think large. That is, to think about shapes that were not going to be made with a little brush, but going to be spread out over large surfaces.
In making the stencils and painting, however, the focus shifted from scale to detail.
Just working with pigment
and being able to use a stencil to think through a stencil, which is different than just applying paint. But this is using a device, and the device is a stencil. The stencil gives a certain kind of shape and a certain kind of texture, a certain kind of anonymity, I guess you could say, in the process. It's not direct, it's indirect. And once you understand how to work through stencils, it comes to being able to manipulate color very much like you could with a brush. And so what I had to do was to get my assistants to think that way, to think that the stenciling process was part of the painting process, was part of the invention.
Once the paint was applied to the pieces, the dynamic interaction between each side became clear.
The way I painted it also has a lot to do with the sound. In that the jazz beat is painted on one side, that is the pattern, repetitive pattern on one side of the chorus line figures, and on the other side we have just a kind of solo, I guess we could say. Also, I'm trying to combine and compare the opaque and the transparent. The transparent really is the silent beat that informs the solo as we go through it.
The shift from painting to construction comes as Kravitz adds the final touches to the figures and begins to prepare for the installation. While the musicians destined for the foyer are all in one piece, the atrium dancers, about 3 times larger and consisting of 7 different parts, have to be assembled on the studio floor and transported to the site. Project assistant Kevin March welds together the smaller triangles that will support the dancers' heads, while Walter paints the larger triangles which underpin the bodies.
Each part is going to rotate independently of the other, like a kind of puppet or a marionette, where the head is going to swing differently, and we'll have a swivel between the head and the torso, and another swivel between the torso and the pelvis. So we'll see that triangle, that triangular section moving throughout the space.
In October 1997, Kravitz hangs the quartets of musicians in the foyer. To his talents as an artist, he has to add the know-how of an engineer.
We have to find the place from which we're going to suspend this quartet of musician figures, which weigh about 150 pounds, 200 pounds perhaps, which is not overly heavy, but at the same time, we need to be safe, we need to be secure. The quartet idea works quite a bit for the movement or the motion aspect of this work, because they just influence each other like a pinwheel. One part influences another, which influences another, which gets the whole thing going. From our rigging and placement last night, everything seems to be in motion. It's the lightness of the material plus just the air currents up on top of the ceiling that allow for more movement than I thought, which is very pleasurable to see.
Night falls as the 2 men struggle to hang the last pieces. But already the musicians dazzle and spin in the headlights and streetlights. In December 1997, Walter began to supervise the hanging of the dancers in the atrium. Even assembling the equipment in the atrium required some quick thinking and on-the-spot problem solving.
What we had to do is get the lift down to the narrowest possible width, and we got it through one door in the front, which was amazing. There was an inch on each side. That combined with getting the shapes in, which were done at my studio in accordance with trying to truck them here and get them through the doors, and then re-established here with arms and extensions and legs and extensions and
so on, so that we could lift it up into place as finished pieces.
As each figure is assembled, the team, under supervising engineer Gary Floyd, prepares to hoist it to the ceiling.
Good to go on here.
Come this way.
Okay.
Got three.
Stand by, Joe.
The committee for this project was really interested in finding a word that brought color and light into the building, something that would enliven the space, because it tends to be a fairly drab interior and a little bit depressing for the people who work here. They also wanted something that would be maintenance-free and that would last a good long time, 20, 30, or 50 years. And then finally, they wanted something that somehow related to the neighborhood and to the community. The U Street corridor has a very rich and long history, and the committee for the project wanted somehow to tie into that so that the work would have relevance for the community.
The installation is designed for pedestrians who walk through the building on their way to offices and back, and for those who work in the building 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Minor adjustments help the figures attract their audience.
We're just changing a foot here so that the figure is a little lower in the space and I guess invites a little bit more interaction.
The artist has already seen some evidence of people's pleasure in his work.
The interesting thing is that in the front, that is where the musician figures are, over that way, that's where a lot of people come in with their kids. And the kids are walking under the musicians and looking up and pointing.
In creating public art, the artist has to keep reminding himself that he's just not creating something for a small audience or for a museum, that he's created something for a public space that is going to receive a lot of visitors, that it has to be a work that is not just going to be there and be forgotten after people have seen it a couple of times. The work needs to have layers of complexity, layers of understanding, and even layers of meaning, so that as the people, for instance, who work in the building will be able to continue to enjoy and maybe discover some new interest in the work.
I have talked with several people who work here, both yesterday and today, and in fact, one lady came up to me and she was walking with her friend. She was taking positions like the figures themselves as she was walking, and she said, "Are you the artist?" I said, "Yes," and she said, "Well, I certainly am amazed because they come real close to me in my office, but in some ways I can see right through them. I can see right through one into the next and to the next, and it changes the way I view out of my window." An important part of this piece, because as I had said before, the piece is both for the pedestrian moving through and the office worker who has to stay here 8 hours a day.
A friend of mine who is a very experienced public artist said that a good public artist should have the ear of a journalist, the eye of a poet, and the hide of an armadillo. And I have known Walter for many years. I've worked with him, and I know that he has those qualities. He is very patient, understand that the public art process takes a long time. He is willing to listen to the committee, to his audience, to the public, and I think he's very tough too.
As the pace of work picks up, Kravitz begins to see the effects he's only been able to imagine over the last year of work.
To see them up above head level, to see them floating, rather than bound to gravity and on the floor, was certainly the way I'm thinking about them all the way along. In fact, from the very first day, I thought of them as floating figures or dancing figures. So it's good to see them this way because it kind of completes the circle.
I think what I like especially about Walter's work in the public forum is the interplay between 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions, and how they act as if they were in a 3-dimensional life, but they're flat, and so there's always a duality between what you feel and what you see. So it looks very airy and insubstantial in a way, but on the other hand, it occupies the architectural space in a very forceful manner, so that you have mass and form, but you have it constructed in a very light and spiritual way.
Who did this?
I did.
You're the artist that did these? They're fantastic. How long did it take you?
About a year. About a year. I do these pieces to a great degree to be surprised and to be interested myself in what it's going to look like. So I'll try things that I'm not sure will work from the drawing, but I sense it. I sense it'll work. I think it'll work. But there's always an element of surprise and mystery in the pieces that I do, and in the works that I do. That's the only thing that gets me through some of these long processes, is that I'm thinking ahead as to what that could look like. We can switch to the phone. So this, what time do we have? 43 minutes. Okay, we're going to switch to another public art work. Well, let's go with this one. This is the one, Memphis. This is a piece that I did at the Memphis airport about 2 years after I did the work. Got the sound? Yeah.
Ain't no
video is a little short because of the time factor, but I want you to see the development of this next piece, which is the ball power piece, which I did for the next ball. So I want you to see, it starts off with a model. So you'll see a model, and then it'll switch to the site itself. So how many people are baseball fans here? Has anybody seen the piece? Because if you don't go to the concourse on the second level, between first base and home plate, you won't see it. But you gotta go there, the food court, and you'll see it. It's suspended work. So go ahead, this is the model for it.
Searching for a new dog. Nothing they could say could come from me. If you let me come back, I'd make you
I think it's great. I think it captures baseball at some of its best. You know, the guys move, look like they're moving with it, rotating. They're throwing, catching the ball, diving. It's back to the early day of baseball. Yeah, true, what the city was about. The guys all look like they're enjoying themselves, having a great time. This is before steroids.
One of a kind, one of a kind. Couldn't do it again.